Hello, everybody, and welcome into my latest live broadcast. It's Friday, the 22nd of April, 2022. My name is Kerry Holzman, and I am a working computer technician professionally in the industry since 1991, and been working on computers for pretty much every day since then. And I hope to bring to my YouTube channel a unique perspective coming from professionals in the industry, not the same old hobbyist and enthusiast stuff you see plenty of on YouTube. So that's all good and well, but it's oversaturated in my opinion, and there's not enough people in the industry who actually do this for a living to give you some practical and pragmatic approaches and suggestions and perspectives when it comes to building, repairing, and upgrading computers. I've invited all of you to send an email if you have a question. I will read your questions in live broadcast. The email address, I will put that right up on the screen for you, right there. Oh, I suppose my video is kind of blocking that a little bit. So let me just move my video up, and you should be able to see that email address. And if you email me at that address for tech support questions, I'm not going to respond to you, but watch for my future videos where I will read your emails aloud and answer your questions. If people are interested in any business regarding a computer repair or purchasing a new computer or upgrading an existing computer, you can reach out to me at that email address for any business inquiries. Otherwise, all other emails will be summarily removed because as you can imagine, as the channel's growing, I get bombarded with emails. You have no idea. But for the proper usage case, and I'll ask you not to abuse it, but I can always block it. So it's not a big deal. But I'm asking you not to abuse it and to follow the rules, and we'll help each other out. Now, speaking of that, I did get a few emails already because I've offered this in the past. And I wanted to address one just before we get started today. And that's from David F. And he wants to know, when it comes to installing or updating drivers, it's unclear which ones are best to download because there's 3 places to obtain drivers. You can obtain drivers from the website or the computer motherboard manufacturer for chipset drivers, Windows Update, or the websites of component makers like Intel, AMD, Realtek, etc. I'm also aware there's an issue of customized drivers from computer or motherboard manufacturers versus generic drivers. Not only that, but apparently drivers need to be installed in the correct order on a fresh Windows installation. I believe chipset drivers need to be installed first before all their drivers. Is that true? I hope you can answer this in a future YouTube video. This is from David in the UK. So let's address some of this. The problem that we're running into, and welcome to getting older, the information you have here is outdated. This really doesn't apply anymore. With regards to the order in which drivers are installed, that was a case with older hardware and older operating systems and no longer applies. It was once true, no longer. With regards to manufacturers customizing drivers, this is particularly true on pre-built computers. So if you have a pre-built Dell or HP or even a laptop, you want to go to the manufacturer for drivers. You may not be getting the latest drivers on a laptop because if the manufacturer of the chip has a newer driver, but the manufacturer of the laptop hasn't updated it, it won't allow you to install any other driver. It says you have to go to the manufacturer. It enforces that. Windows Update, for the most part, will cover all of the drivers you need. My question to David would be, why do you want to know this information? Are you having a problem you're trying to solve, or are you simply sort of a technochondriac in the sense that you have hypochondria with tech, that you always think something's wrong? This is a sure way to make something wrong. So overall, my advice is don't fix it if it ain't broke. You will get all of your drivers through Windows Update unless it's a unique piece of hardware that's not common, in which case you'd have to go to the manufacturer for that driver. It could be a bizarre printer manufacturer, some uncommon brand or scanner or postal machine, stamp machine, stuff like that. You'd have to go to the manufacturer for that specialty hardware. I like to use the Intel Driver Updater Assistant, which is completely free, and will sometimes offer the drivers before Windows Update will offer the drivers, and sometimes it will fight with Windows Update. So there's some consequences to this. So usually when I'm updating drivers, it's to solve a problem, with the only exception being video card drivers. Video card drivers come out quite often, and I'm an NVIDIA graphics card user, and that's what I support. And these video card drivers can enhance performance of the graphics card or compatibility with the latest games and other like broadcasting software and editing software to make things run more smoothly, or even to fix crashes that are occurring. And those I would just go to NVIDIA and get those manually. However, on my Dell laptop, which also has an NVIDIA card in my Dell XPS, I cannot download the drivers from NVIDIA. As I previously mentioned, on pre-builds, it'll say this machine's not compatible and you've got to get your driver from Dell. So I have to go to the Start menu. Under the letter D, there's an application called Dell Update. And with Dell Update, you have to check it manually. And if you're doing that just to stay on top of things, even though you're not having any problems, you just want to make sure, once a month, once every 2 months is plenty. Most of the stuff coming through Dell's Update is going to be offered through Windows Update in time, such as BIOS updates and things like that. That'll all happen through Windows Update. If you're building a computer custom, like what you see me do here, Windows 10 should automatically grab all of your updates, and you shouldn't have to install anything by hand. When I'm diagnosing a problem, particularly network card problems, usually a driver update is what fixes it. And I've had situations where both the Intel Driver Update Assistant and Windows Update say there's no updates available, but then I look at the driver page specifically for the Intel network card, network interface card that the computer has, and lo and behold, there's like a newer driver by 2 or 3 years. And then I download and install that, and it's usually a small download, and that will almost always fix the network problems. So the old driver would work on the internet fine, but when I went to do file sharing, or the customer went to do file sharing, the file sharing wouldn't work. And we check the cables, we check the Windows settings on all the computers, the services, the permissions, the router, the switch, and it just turns out to be a network card driver. But they never knew there was a problem until they started sharing. So in that case, I'm not just looking for drivers for the sake of looking for drivers. I'm doing it to solve a problem. Sound card drivers pretty much don't get updated the way they used to, so I wouldn't see any reason that you would have to go and grab any sound card drivers. However, the general rule is Windows 10 is going to give you all of your drivers, and it's going to happen automatically through Windows Update, or you'll have to hit the optional updates button and select those. I like the Intel Driver Updater. I install it on all the Intel systems because it lets me know if a new driver or firmware is available for the SSD. Even on an Intel NUC, it'll tell me if there's a new BIOS update and it will apply it. I can't say enough good things about it, and it works fine on an AMD system as well that may have Intel components like an Intel network card. So that being said, it's a good question, it's a fair question, but it's a question that would only be asked by somebody who's been doing this for a while, because that is something that we used to have to do manually. There wasn't any other way. And we're moving away from that, and we've moved quite a bit away from it now, where you pretty much just plug the computer in and it self-maintains drivers. So if you consider 80 or 90% of the computer owners are not computer people, they're not technical people, they're not getting the driver updates, or they used to not get critical driver updates regarding reliability, security, and performance. And this has been an ongoing issue, well, since the home computer became popular. So this is how they've solved it, by just having them come automatically through Windows 10. So like I said, unless it's some unique piece of hardware, something that isn't sold in large quantities, then you'll have to do that by hand through the manufacturer of the device. If it's a pre-built laptop or desktop, you get it through the manufacturer. And if it's something you built yourself, Windows 10 should take care of it. Yes, you can go to the motherboard manufacturer if you built it yourself and get drivers there, but over time, generally speaking, the motherboard manufacturers don't keep that up to date. It costs them money. They got to pay somebody to do that. So they generally will only do it if it's critical. If it's an improvement in performance, they probably won't be bothered because that sale was done whenever it was done and they already made their profit and they've already moved on. In that case, you'd go to the manufacturer of the chip, right? If it's a sound chip, a network chip, and if it's Intel-based, the Intel driver update assistant is completely free. But those days of backing up drivers or paying for software to provide drivers, those days are over. And those companies are struggling to continue to find reasons why you should pay money for an unnecessary piece of software. And those companies will need to pivot and change their business model into some other kind of software, or they will go out of business. This will all happen automatically now through Windows 10 and Windows Update. And of course, that continues to expand on Windows 11 and will continue until at some point in the future, there just won't be any necessity to even talk about drivers. That's what I'm predicting. So I appreciate the question. Thanks for writing in. And if you have a question, the email address there on the bottom of the screen, use the subject line like tech question, something like that. And that way I know when it comes in which folder to sort it in. And when I do these live videos, I will pick the ones that I can answer or ones that I think are most beneficial to most people and read them aloud and answer them here live on YouTube. So I appreciate your participation. And let's go put everything back how it was here. We'll go back to full screen. Okay. Thank you, Peter Laycock, with a 50-pound contribution. And Peter says, good evening, Kerry, and everyone in the chat from Edinburgh, Bonnie, Scotland, where the temperature in Edinburgh is 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, that sounds nice. We have a very windy, little overcast day today, which is a little break from the heat. Still warm, though. But the heat is coming. It'll be here soon. Here in Phoenix, Arizona. And thank you to Steve Mercure, who contributes $5. He says, hot dog build is running my ham radio station just fine. Here's a donation to the Gatorade Fund. Thank you, Steve. Adam Sleeth contributes 20 Australian dollars. Loving the recent videos, he says. Thanks, Kerry. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And XRod666 contributes $20 and says, howdy, Kerry. How you doing? Hey, it's Friday, so I'm doing great. I have the missing cable I needed to finish the cooler installation on the build earlier in the week, but I'll get to that next week. And today, what I have is the third attempt of, well, I suppose it's the second attempt, of putting the old hardware from U.S. military veteran Marvin's older computer into a larger case. Marvin bought his computer from a company called Lyte Computers out of Illinois, and the case they put it in was way too small. It was way too much hardware. And if you're going to use a liquid cooler, which in some cases you might need to if you're buying a really high-end processor, it's going to run really fast, it's going to consume a lot of power, it's going to run hot. And sometimes an air cooler just isn't going to cut it, or sometimes an air cooler just doesn't look good in an otherwise very expensive computer, so they want a certain aesthetic to it. And when they being Lyte Computers, when they initially started building Marvin's computer, they had called him and said, you need to give us more money because we can't build it in the case we quoted you. And so we had to pay more money, and then they got this other case, which was still too small, but they built in it anyway. Then I took those parts out. I completely recycled the case because it was just some no-name brand junk, in my opinion. And I thought, in the future, I'll put his parts in another case, but in the meantime, built him a new computer. And Marvin doesn't want the parts back. He's got a working gaming computer now without all the flash and without a liquid cooler. He doesn't need that level of performance because he's not creating the games, he's only wanting to play them. And so the case that I had built in was a Be Quiet 500DX, and I learned the hard way that that case was also too small for a liquid cooler. So I have pulled all the parts back out of that case, and we're going to try again on the Corsair 4000D. The reason we have this Corsair 4000D is a viewer in Michigan, Bob Connors, had purchased it and changed his mind and didn't want to use it. And he said, "Do you want it?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." So it was brand new in the box, never even had the tape cut on the box, never even opened it. And so it's only been opened today, earlier today, in preparation for this video. And there are two versions of this case. There's one called the Airflow, which has a front that has holes in it. And then there's this version. This version's a little bit more money, I don't know why, and both versions are in a black color or a white color. They're right around $100, and you can see the case is a bit larger. When we're adding a liquid cooler to a system, you've got to consider the thickness of the cooler with the fans on it. It'll often, you know, if you're mounting the cooler on top, it'll often cover up the top of the motherboard. Whether you've got a big board or a small board, ATX, micro ATX, or mini ITX, all the boards mount at the top. It's just a matter of how far down they go. But the liquid cooler, if it's mounting on the top, will universally cover all the connections across the top of the board. Fan connections, CPU power header, CPU power connection. There could be multiple connections across the top of the motherboard. And that when we put the cooler in with the fans, we need about that much space. And if we put that much space, even in this case, it looks like we're covering the top of the motherboard. As I'm looking at it now, I can see the motherboard standoffs are right about here. That's going to be the top of the board. And I know the liquid cooler with fans attached is going to be about 2.5 inches. And the solution for this is for the case manufacturers to raise the lid of the machine by 2 inches or 2.5 inches over the top of the last or the first standoff, depending on your perspective. Now, it seems a pretty rare thing to find, and I don't know why. Alternately, you could put the radiator for the cooler up in the front if you want to do that, but sometimes the radiators are so long that they may interfere with the ability to put a 2.5-inch hard drive in. Sometimes the hard drives are in movable cages, and they can slide maybe an inch to the left or to the right. So you can slide the hard drive cage to the right, but if you have a longer power supply, you may not have access to plug any cables in if it's modular, because the hard drive cage will then get in the way of that. So you can see what kind of a mess it turns into because somebody wants the looks of a liquid cooler, or they want the looks of less cable management by going with a modular power supply. So you're going to pay for this aesthetic, even though it has nothing to do with performance, reliability, or security of your computer. And these computers are temporary. Most computers need to be replaced after about 6 years. Some people can extend that. I've heard of people running, 12 years, but you're not going to do that with a liquid cooler. It's not likely. Liquid coolers have a lifespan of an average of 4 years. We just did a liquid cooler replacement. That cooler wasn't 2 years old, not even 2 years old, and it already failed. I did a different liquid cooler replacement that I installed in 2013. That liquid cooler went out in 2015 or 2016, and it's all documented here on the channel. If we put an air cooler on it, it runs indefinitely as far as the cooler goes. Worst thing that can happen is you've got to change a fan, but it's not much to look at. And if it's a big if it's a big air cooler, because you've got a high-end processor, well, then you're covering up all your RGB and your RAM, which makes that a waste of money. So when we get to emphasizing sort of showboating our computers, it significantly adds to the build time that's required, the cable management that's required, and compatibility research of parts suddenly becomes absolutely critical, or you're rolling the dice where the odds are not in your favor that things are going to fit without a problem. Now, sometimes there's a way, like in that Be Quiet 500DX case, that we can sandwich parts on top of each other or layer them. And that's apparently what Be Quiet expected us to do. And if you watch that video, you'll see that I had to remove the radiator. See, I put the radiator in so I could put the water block on. But then when I did that, I realized that the water block had connections that had to go up behind the radiator at the top of the board. And I couldn't reach them no matter what I did. It's a tight fit and it's dark. So I ended up taking the radiator back out so I could plug the water block in and any other connections that I needed to double check at the top of the board, and then put the radiator back in again. Normally, as a working computer technician, this isn't the kind of work you would normally do. Something like that would cost a customer upwards of $200 in labor. So customers aren't generally paying for that. This is something a customer would do on their own, and it would be an enthusiast activity, and it would be somebody who enjoys the process of taking everything apart unnecessarily because it's fun for them. Well, I do enjoy doing the work that I do. What I enjoy more is helping people. And if a job is going to cost somebody a prohibitively expensive amount of money, and it's going to take half or more of my day for that one customer, and there's 5 days in the week, working days, 5 weekdays, and there's 52 weeks a year, then how many customers can I help? So not only that, the more customers I help, in theory, the more money I can make and the more promotion I do for my business. Because a happy customer will tell their friends, hey, this guy or this gal fixed my computer and did a great job, and they were in and they were out, and they did what they said they were going to do, and it was a great price. If you need a computer person, this is your person. That's better than any advertising you can pay for. The fewer customers you help, the fewer referrals you're going to get. The more customers you help, the more money you make, the more referrals you get. And so when a job takes double the amount of labor for no apparent reason other than the customer just likes the colors, on a business side of things, it's not very sustainable, not for me anyway. And no corporation or professional IT department in any corporation in America would have a technician install a liquid cooler, RGB lighting. They won't have glass panels on their cases. That encourages employee theft because you can see what's in it and the employees might take it. That was a big problem I had at a couple of corporations I worked at in the 90s where RAM was mysteriously gone, and it was costing the company a lot of money, and we ended up having to use a special security screw when we put the panels on. Even though they weren't glass and no one could see what was inside, you could see when the computer's on how much memory's in it. And they were just using regular Phillips screws to hold everything together, as you normally would. And so they issued special security bits to the IT department so that we could service the computer. Well, initially we had to visit every single computer and replace the case screws with the security screws. So you can imagine the company had, I don't know how many computers, somewhere, I would guess 500 to 1,000. And we had to visit every one of those workstations and change those screws out. That's how bad the theft got. So glass panels are out, RGB is out, liquid cooling is out, overclocking is out. None of that's good for business in corporate America. So that's why I say doing these videos as a working computer technician in the industry, I can share with you a different perspective than you're accustomed to seeing on YouTube, which is a bunch of enthusiast folks who just enjoy that. And, you know, look, if you just have one computer and it's your computer and this is a break from your day to take it apart and put it all back together again, I can understand the enjoyment that can come from that. But when you're under a lot of pressure and you've got a lot of work to do, I need you to fix 4 computers today. I'm your boss, you work for me. I need you to fix 4 computers in this 8-hour day, and I need you to do that 5 days a week. And if you fall below that average, we're going to write you up and warn you, and if you continue to underperform, we're going to let you go. So this is your living, right? This is what you do to pay your bills, to eat, and maybe support your family. And so the pleasure of taking everything apart is now more of a challenge to trying to do as much as you possibly can, so that if you're going to do 5 computers a day, you're doing 1 more over the average on a regular basis. We're going to give you a raise. We're going to move you up, and we're going to have you train others to show them how you do it, and you're going to become more successful. If you meet the minimum, well, you'll just kind of stay there indefinitely, and if you fall below, you got to go. So you understand that the perspective of a professional in the industry is going to be very different because of those stresses and pressures, and what is weighing on that. Like what's the consequence? So if a home user wants to take their computer all the way apart to make a liquid cooler fit, and it takes them 3 or 4 or 5 days because they work on it a little bit, and then they're like, I had enough of that for today, I'll work on it tomorrow. That's just an enthusiast activity. It's like buying a puzzle, and maybe somebody puts that puzzle together in an hour, and maybe somebody puts the puzzle together in 2 weeks, right? They're not being measured and timed, and their livelihood isn't at risk. So when I do my videos, what I'm trying to establish to all of you is that the way businesses do things always makes sense. Always, even for consumers. But the way consumers do things doesn't really make sense even to other consumers in a lot of cases, and it never makes sense to businesses. And so if it makes sense to a business, it should make sense to a consumer. A business won't go without backing up their data thinking, oh, that won't happen to us. Not a professional organization, certainly not a large corporation. And if they were to have that attitude, they likely won't be in business very much longer, because it's only a matter of time before a situation happens and they have no way out of it, and that's it, it's done. And plenty of businesses, usually smaller businesses, have had to close the doors for situations like that. So, if you want to be sustainable and you want to continue to operate a business indefinitely, then these practices, these procedures are put into place in order to have that insurance, right? In order to make sure that you can recover, and that recovery is going to take as little time as possible, because any amount of time in recovery is lost revenue. As a result, when a consumer loses their data, it mostly is more emotional than anything else, but not necessarily financially destructive, in the sense that they're going to have to lose their house and their car, their possessions. But that does happen to businesses who don't follow proper practices. For that reason, when businesses have these practices and procedures, they're always good for consumers to follow, because even then the consumer doesn't want to have that emotional issue. Even if it's not as devastating to a consumer, it might as well be. So following the hobbyists and the enthusiasts is all well and good as a novelty, but when it comes to actually spending money wisely, getting the best bang for your buck, or the best performance, or ensuring that you have contingencies when things go wrong, that's always going to make your life less stressful as a consumer. Unless, as I said, you enjoy that, right? If your computer breaks down and your first thought is, oh boy, I get to fix it, well, then the enthusiast channels are right for you. But if you're thinking, I really enjoy fixing computers, and my computer doesn't break often enough, I'd really like to do it for a living, understand that what you'll do for a living is going to add pressure, right? You're expected to do a certain amount of work every day, or an average, and they're going to pay you on that, and they're going to perhaps let you go or promote you depending on where you fall within the expected average. So it's a very different mindset, a very different perspective of how one looks at the work, and it's a great career to have. I've been doing this for professionally over 30 years, and there's a reason why I still do it today. Even with the frustrations, it's still at the end of the day, it's very rewarding for me to solve problems for people, to get paid to do it. And the more people I can help, the more fulfilling it is for me emotionally and financially. So if you see me getting frustrated and flustered over a problem that shouldn't exist, like a case that claims to be compatible with a liquid cooler, but in doing so you've got to remove half of everything to get the cooler in or out, you'd be much better off buying a more appropriate case. And that's going to require, as I mentioned earlier, more research in order to avoid that frustration. Now, I don't know that this is necessarily going to solve the problem with this 4000D case. It is a little bit taller than the 500DX we were previously on, but I am noticing that the standoff, it's going to be close. Now, if the fans are just covering the very top of the board, I can probably reach in there. But I'll tell you what, if I had a little gap, if I had a centimeter of a gap between the bottom of the radiator fan and the top of the motherboard, that would be perfect. And in this case, it would likely only have to be a little bit taller than they made it. It doesn't really add much to the manufacturing cost. Visibly, it's not going to look any different unless you were to set them side by side. And they're already adding that much height. They're adding more than that just with the feet. So it's not a question of making the case too tall. They've already made the case at least an inch and a half taller there, just by the feet alone. So if we took those feet down by a centimeter and added a little bit to the top of the case, we'd have the exact same height with more working room inside of the case, make any maintenance or upgrades or repairs much, much easier. We can get in and get out quicker. But keep that in mind when you're picking a case. I think a lot of people just look at the design of it. That's like buying a car based on how it looks. You know, if that's your thing, that's your thing. But I'm more interested in how much power does the car have? What's the warranty? What are the features of the car? What's the gas mileage? And I combine all of that along with the looks. I don't just prioritize, well, it looks cool, so I'll tolerate it. Those are usually the cars you spend the most amount of money on for maintenance because they're oftentimes hard to work on, and usually not a lot of people buy them, so the parts are not in abundance, and the parts are then going to cost more and be more difficult to acquire. So I've got the motherboard off to the side. It's already got the water pump attached to it. And we're going to figure out how to get this installed. I thought I'd first go ahead and put the power supply in. These are all the same parts. The only thing I'm changing is the case. We'll see how this plays out. The power supply, once again, is a Be Quiet. It's an 850 watt modular power supply. Should have all the connections we need right there. Once I get the power supply in, I'll bring the motherboard over with the radiator all kind of attached to it. And that'll be a little bit of an exercise to not damage anything, to bring that motherboard over to the counter and then lay the case flat and work on getting the board installed and the radiator installed. Then we should be able to wire it up and turn it on. We'll see what happens, but that's our goal for today. I'm going to take a look here in the chat. Looks like I've missed a little bit. Where are we? Let's see. Bob R. contributes $10. He says, here's my tuition fee for today's class. Thank you, Bob. Captain Blinsky with $5. Temi K with $5 Canadian says, happy Friday, Carrie. Thanks for another great video. Thank you. Sherry McFarland says, do you think air coolers are more reliable for the long haul? Yeah, I mean, it is literally what I said. The only thing that can go wrong with an air cooler is a fan can go out, and the fans are very easily changed, inexpensive, and easy to acquire, unless there's some specialty to it. Liquid coolers are generally designed for high-end processors. The pumps will wear out, or the liquid gets, it sometimes evaporates, or it gets material contamination built into it. And the radiator itself can become clogged and plugged up. I think the logic is that most people wouldn't want a high-end computer for more than 4 years because it won't be a high-end computer anymore. Most people who buy high-end computers, it's plural. They don't just buy one. They buy the high-end computer in 1996. They buy the high-end computer in 1998. They buy the high-end computer in 2000 or 2001, et cetera, et cetera. They just keep, because the high-end computer is only high-end for about 2 years. After that, it's not high-end anymore. It's more middle of the road as the CPU technology continues to evolve. So many of those folks would never have any issue with the pump in that time. It's like leasing a car. If you lease a car, it really doesn't matter how reliable the car is because it's going to be under warranty no matter what, right? A lease is, what, 2 or 3 years. Car warranties are usually a minimum of 36 months with few exceptions. So if you have any problems, it's all going to be covered by warranty, and you're not likely going to have any problems because the parts are all brand new. As the car ages, that's when you start running into potential repairs. Same is true here. And if you want a machine to be as reliable as possible with as low maintenance cost as possible, you'll avoid all the unnecessary nonsense, because it's not only adding cost, but everything you add is one more thing that can break and that you'll have to deal with. Whether it's a liquid cooler, whether it's an RGB light strip or an RGB fan, the more you add, the more that can break. So a computer in a business that I build might have 7 components: case, motherboard, CPU cooler, air cooler, RAM, storage, power supply. That's it. Now we want to add a liquid cooler. We're adding 2 more fans, usually 2 more, sometimes 3 more fans. We're going to add, let's say, some RGB light strips. Perhaps we want a memory card reader or a DVD drive. Everything we add is one more thing that can break and adds to the cost of the initial cost of building the machine. So if you are somebody who's got all day and nothing else better to do, or you enjoy that kind of thing and it's plenty of money, no, money's not a problem, have at it, but just set your expectations accordingly. The fewer things you have to make up the computer, the fewer things that can break. And then, of course, the less likely you're going to have an issue. However, I will also state as a caveat to that, some of the pre-built manufacturers put everything on a single board and they disguise it in a tower case so it looks like a regular computer, but inside it's just a single little motherboard with everything built onto it. There's no upgrade possible and no repair possible. So once the warranty is out on that, you throw it in the garbage or throw it in the recycle bin. There's no repairing those. And those are often your $300 tower computers. They're really cheap ones. They are disposable. And they don't make that clear in the marketing. And from the external look of them, they look no different. It's the insides that are different. Channel 0 contributes 10 Australian dollars. Says, what's the best air cooler for a 10900K CPU? I wouldn't use an air cooler on a 10900K. That is going to be the highest end processor Intel sold for 10th gen. It means it's going to run hotter than any other 10th gen processor. And therefore, in that situation, a liquid cooler should be used. However, something like the Noctua D15, it's a big cooler that will work, and it'll work well, but it's going to cover any RGB up. All you're going to see is just your motherboard is about this big and that cooler is about this big. So all you're going to look at if you have a glass panel is this giant cooler. It's not pretty. So if you want to use an air cooler and you want to be able to show off the insides of the computer, don't buy the 900K. Not an 11 900K, not a 12 900K, not a 10 900K, not a 9900K. If it ends in 900K, I would not consider an air cooler. Robert Jones says hello. Hello, Robert. Paul Kitching says hello. Hello, Paul. Colin Hunt with 10 pounds contributed. Thank you, Colin. Steve H contributes $10. He says, try to stay cool. We got some snow up here in Reno. Wow. Snow in late April. Interesting. So when I talk about cooling a CPU, we're talking about when the CPU is under load. If the CPU, if all you do with your computer is you're browsing the web and opening email and looking at Word documents, watching videos, it's a complete waste of money for you to have bought the 10900K anyway. And a Scythe Mugen 5 will keep that cool because you're not really using it. So when I'm talking about cooling, I'm talking about cooling it if it were actually to be utilized and put under a load for more than a few minutes, then the Scythe Mugen 5 won't keep up. On a 10900 or 11900 or 12900, it'll just cause the CPU to eventually start to throttle down and lower its performance in order to save itself from burning up. And if it's still not adequate, it'll just shut the machine off to save itself. Pretty much a liquid cooler will cool any chip out there. They're superior in their ability to battle higher temperatures. And the high-end CPUs have higher temps. The lower or middle CPUs don't have as much power consumption and they don't run as hot. And so the cooling demands on them are not as, what's the word? They don't generate that much heat that they require liquid cooling when they're pushed hard. Joseph Panarello contributes $10 and says hello. Hey, Joseph, thank you. Channel Zero's got a 10700. Anything below a 10900K will likely be cooled fine with a Scythe Mugen 5, including like a 10850K. Believe it or not, a 10850K is only 100 megahertz slower, but in my experiments with it, actually I think I used a Noctua cooler on that one, but not the D15, but the U12S, and it seems to be fine. But again, you'd really have to push the CPU hard to really thoroughly test it. That's why I run Prime 95 for about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes on my builds, because I've never met a customer yet in my life that pushes a CPU that hard for that length of time without a break. The CPU is supposed to ramp up as needed. So it'll ramp up and go down and ramp up and go down. And that's normal and that's the way it should be. But if somebody's just an excessively powerful user, very demanding user, then a very demanding user shouldn't have the expectation that they're going to get a cheap computer and that's going to be adequate for them. Does that make sense? Luke Greenia says, hey, Kerry, I sent you the usual $25 via PayPal. I hope you're having a great day. Hey, thank you, Luke. I appreciate that very much. Hey, there's Marvin Jameson joining us in the chat. Welcome in, Marvin. Martin Hogg says, thanks for 40% off my Acronis. Right on. Yeah, that's a great deal. If you're interested in backup and cloning software, the folks at Acronis are sponsoring this channel. And well, you have choices of backup and cloning software. None of the other ones are supporting us here. So if you want to support Acronis back, not to mention, I think they have the best backup and cloning product out there. But regardless of what I think, the fact is Acronis is supporting us. And so for us to support them back, that just encourages Acronis to support us more. So, and it's going to save you guys a ton of money. And it's a limited time offer. It's good until the 15th of May, 2022. use the coupon code CarrieHolzman2022 at checkout. The coupon code is usually listed, or the option, the link to enter a coupon code is right below the product that you want to select. And you'll get you 40% off. So I'm glad you took advantage of it. And of course, my thanks to the folks at Acronis for offering you guys a significant discount and for supporting what we're doing here. All right, so let's do a little work, huh? Let's get this panel off and we'll see how things are going to fit. I'm a little anxious about this because I really don't want to take this apart a third time. I could put an air cooler on the Ryzen 3900X, and as long as we don't push it that hard, an air cooler will do the job. But if we push it really hard over 5 to 15 minutes, it may cause the whole system to shut down due to heat-related problems. Let me find a place to set this panel. And we'll take the other side off as well. 488 people are watching live right now. Give us a shout out. Let us know where you're watching from. Channel Zero contributes $5 Australian and says thank you very much for everything. Right? Well, thank you. DOTL contributes $10. Says Carrie, I'm a computer tech myself and recently started running my own IT business, and I appreciate all of your business insight and information. Right on. Well, I hope it's helpful to you. I did not have any place to go for help because there weren't really computer repair businesses when I started. Few and far between. There was no Geek Squad or anything like that. So I had to kind of figure things out the hard way, and almost went out of business several times through making decisions that, given the information I had, I thought were the right decision. So now I have the ability to share this with others now, and hopefully you can do better than I did and be more successful than I am, having information I didn't have much earlier. Winston Liu out of Canada, out of Vancouver, contributes $5 Canadian and says, "Oh, Canada," from Vancouver, Canada. Thank you, Winston. And if we look in the chat, we see people watching from Ohio and San Diego, Indiana and Wisconsin, Trinidad and Tobago. We've got Flint, Michigan in the house, along with Rhode Island, Wisconsin, and Belfast in the UK. And what else? Another in Ireland and Barbados and Westminster, California, as well as Arkansas, Jamaica, Boston, Mass. Another from Massachusetts. That said Atlanta. It says Atlantis. Winnipeg in the house, Central Georgia, St. Augustine, Florida, Chicago, Iowa, and even Sweden, as well as Texas, Pennsylvania, and Israel. Got folks from Croatia, the Netherlands, South London, Tennessee, and Qatar. Check that out, that's pretty cool. As well as Belgium, South Dakota, Croatia, Ireland, Romania, Wyoming, the Staffordshire Moorlands in the UK, Byron Bay in Australia, and Luke Greenia joins us from northern Vermont. That's pretty awesome, guys. It is a staggered worldwide audience. There's a little bit of audience from all over. That's pretty cool. All right, so let's see, what do I want to do here first? So first, we've got the box of mounting hardware right here. Get that out. Put that back in. There, we need that later. I really like the cable management, the thoughtfulness here, where there are little brackets and tracks, as well as Velcro cable management ties. That should make the cable management a lot easier than some of the other cases you've seen here on the channel. Usually, the more expensive the case is, the easier it is to do the cable management. Usually, there's always exceptions. Pratap Gunrig contributes $5. Thank you, Pratap. And let me see. So the power supply, like I say, it's already got the cables on it because we'd already had it hooked up in the other case. So we'll just install that, and we should already have it good to go. Luke says it looks like there's plenty of room in this case, but you know, Luke, looks can be deceiving. My concern, as I mentioned, is going from the top of the motherboard, which is right here, to the top of the case, which is right there, and our radiator with fans is about that thick. So will it overlap the top of the board, making any access to the top of the board difficult? I don't know. It's going to be close. It's certainly roomier than that Be Quiet 500DX. This isn't the slam to Be Quiet 500DX, except for Be Quiet to say that that is a liquid cooler compatible case is a stretch. If we were going to put an air cooler in it, it'd be a lot easier. I'd have a completely different attitude about the case. If Be Quiet simply didn't market the fact that it can handle an all-in-one, I wouldn't have expected it to, and I'd say the fault was mine for trying. But the fact that they do say it can handle it isn't exactly a lie, but it doesn't do it with ease. On the back of the case, we've got these two pieces here for 2.5-inch SATA drives, and down here for two 3.5-inch drives, which you could also put two more 2.5-inch drives if you wanted to. Generally speaking, on the builds I do, I'm staying away from this kind of drive and this kind of drive because it's more cables, and prefer the faster and cheaper, at least cheaper than these, NVMe drives, which look like a stick of gum. I pop them in. There's no cables, there's no cleanup, and you know, if I have to switch one out, I just take off one side panel. If I got to switch a drive out, I got to take off the other side panel and potentially both side panels to work from both sides, depending on the work I'm doing. So these are slower, even slower, and require more cabling, which, you know, if I can avoid it, I'd like to avoid it. All right, so this should go in relatively simple. We have to go in only from the back because we do have a power supply shroud. On a more expensive case, this power supply shroud would be removable. Again, this is usually related to price. You're like, well, that's an expensive case. It's over $100. Well, that's not an expensive case. That would be considered sort of a middle-of-the-road case. When you get up around $200 or $180, then you should expect for things like this to be removable, more customization. Not that it's guaranteed, but again, we're talking about expectations. It would be reasonable to expect a case of that price range or higher to be far more customizable. So I'm going to go ahead and step around and we'll put the power supply in. Still a brand new power supply. And now I want you to watch where this hard drive cage is, because when I slide this power supply in, look at our cables, right? Look at the distance. Now we're going to be able to slide this back a little bit more. And you can see the space between the hard drive cage and the back of this power supply is pretty tight, and it's going to make any maintenance or upgrades difficult. If we want to add a hard drive later, we've got to add the cable. If we take the hard drive cage out, because we have that, that cover over the power supply, we could bury all our cables in here and no one would ever see them, and we don't even have to cable manage them. We just shove them in there. But that means we reduce the option. We take this option out. Oh, wait a minute. This isn't even attached. That's a surprise. I wasn't expecting that. That's new. Remember, I unboxed this myself. This was brand new. It's never been taken out of the box. So either it wasn't assembled correctly at the factory, or it somehow is shaken free. But that's fascinating to me. Wow. Holy cow. There is a piece of styrofoam up here, which is what saved it in shipping. And the problem is the styrofoam is white and the case is white. So let's get that out. Come on now. is in there. Yeah, that absolutely saved this from damage. Well, now we know why that's there, but that's only for shipping purposes. So now this cage can come out because there's nothing holding it in. There appears to be two positions the cage can go in. It can go, I don't know how well the camera's picking it up, but there's these slots or these tabs. And there's 1, 2, 3 of them. And this needs 2 side by side. So you're either going to use the one on the left and the one on the middle, or the one on the right and the one in the middle. And that allows it to shift, I'd say about 1.5 inches either way. That's to get it out of the way of a vertically mounted radiator coming down this way. My preference is to move the cage as close to the front of the case so I have access to the back of the power supply. If the power supply wasn't modular, this wouldn't matter to me. But because I'm going to potentially at some point in the future need to get in and add or remove plugs to the back of the power supply, this cage is going to get in my way. That means that if I were to move the cage, let's say I had a radiator coming down here, then I'd have to leave the cage out, work on the computer, and then the very last thing would be to put the cage back in. And if the cage had to be close to the power supply, I'd make sure all my cables and everything were already done, then put my cage in, then hook my hard drives up. And if I had to add anything or remove anything from the back of the power supply, I'd have to disconnect the drives, unscrew the cage, and take it out just to remove a cable. That would take 30 seconds. It adds a lot of labor to a job. So a bigger case would not have this problem. In this circumstance, a case that's another inch longer, and as I mentioned, another centimeter taller, would make this whole thing unnecessary. The cage could be in a fixed position without interfering, potentially, with a standard size power supply with modular cables, although there are extended power supplies that are modular as well. Those when you get into your 1200 watt, 1500 watt power supplies. But those should really be put in larger cases anyway, which would again give you plenty of room, like the Big Beast build. Lots of room in the Big Beast build. But that's a $550 case and not easy to move. Very, very heavy. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do for right now. You can see that that's going to slide and lock in, and then the thumb screws will lock it down. I want to leave that out for right now. So even though I'm not using any mechanical drives or any 2.5-inch drives, which can be put in these sleds, that's not my decision to make for a customer. This isn't my machine. This is going to go to a client. At some point, it's not sold, but the intention is to sell it. And I want the client to have that so the client can adjust it and customize it to their specific needs. If it was me personally, I'd take the cage out, but I'd save it. I'd put it somewhere where I can find it, because at some point if I want to sell it, I think it should go with the computer to the new owner. Otherwise, there's no way to secure a 3.5-inch mechanical drive in the case, and it would look terrible, and it would be sort of wonky to have a drive just hanging by cables. All right, so to put the power supply in, we'll just align this. See, I'm used to grabbing the other side of the power supply, which I cannot do with the power supply shroud in the way. So the power supply shroud being here and being riveted in means when I go to install this power supply, I can't grab it by each side. Now some cases, and again we'll use the Big Beast build for an example, have a frame that comes out, and you take the frame out and then you attach it to the power supply and slide the power supply in from the back. But once again, this is all riveted. This is your rivets here for this piece, and these are your rivets for the shroud. These could have been screws, and if they were, we'd be able to remove it. I think it adds to a little bit of the cost. I don't know what the reasoning is. So to align this power supply, I kind of have to be creative by where I'm going to grab it, because I need to have the back of the power supply absolutely flush with the back of the case to get the mounting holes to align with both the holes in the power supply and the holes in the case, which is much easier if I can grab it from each side. Can't do that. The benefit, though, is that it hides, again, all kinds of cabling and whatnot that we can put in here. And since this has a glass panel, that's going to improve the aesthetics of the case majorly. But I would appreciate a case where the shroud is removable, such as the Big Beast build. I keep mentioning it because the Big Beast build is the most recent case I've worked on that had that. There are cases that are half that price or less that have that feature. I can't think of any, but if you know of some in the chat and you want to mention them, they're out there. So when I line this up, let's see, it's going to go right about there. So now I need some screws to secure this. I want black screws. The power supply came with screws, but I don't know what I did with them. I think these are them, and it won't matter because all these black computer screws with the hex heads are all exactly the same. So as far as the power supply goes, we use the same screws regardless of the computer case, and they're going to be the hex head coarse threaded screws that are the most commonly used screw throughout computer building. We use different screws for solid state drives, we use different screws for optical drives and memory card readers, but we're not really doing much of that install anymore. It's kind of being phased out. Let's grab the red driver and we'll get things started here. I am so hopeful that this will actually be done this time. And it's really the liquid cooler that's throwing us off. And it was the liquid cooler that threw us off on Wednesdays as well. So these liquid coolers not only cost a lot of money, they can really add complexity to what would otherwise be a relatively simple and straightforward build. Let's not say you shouldn't use a liquid cooler, but just have your expectations set that if you want to do something quickly and you want it to last a really, really long time, do not choose a liquid cooler. And you'll probably save about 50% on the price of your cooler if you're not buying a liquid cooler. So it'll cost you less, be easier to install, and it will last much longer if you were to pick an air cooler. But if the air cooler is covering up any of your RGB or doesn't look as good through the glass, well, all the rest of the money you're forking out is strictly for beautification and does nothing more than that. I just want to tighten these down a little bit by hand because the power supplies are heavy. And you can see that screw right there, that one really turned a lot. And this one's turning a lot. I'll just double check them. I don't want to over tighten them, but I do want them to be secure. Good and a little past snug is what I would describe it as. We've got our motherboard power connector here, right here. We've got our video card power connector here. We've got our CPU power connector here, and we've got a SATA power connector there. Almost all of the liquid coolers will require a SATA power connector, especially if they're RGB. That adds to even more cable management that, once again, you wouldn't necessarily have on an air cooler, unless it's RGB. You can buy liquid coolers that are not RGB. That would save you one less cable. In the box of not spare parts, in the box of the case parts, the case that you buy will come with the screws required to mount the hardware. In this case includes some nylon zip ties. That's a nice touch. Some Velcro zip ties, very similar to what's in the back here. If you need more of them, they get 3 extras. And then we have separate bags of screws and washers. I don't know what the washers are for. We've got extra motherboard standoffs for other form factors of boards. We've got 2 extra thumb screws. That's a nice touch. We've got a bunch of fan screws here. We've got coarse thread screws, which are typically used for mounting the motherboard into the standoffs. And then we have some very fine threaded screws. Those are typically used for solid state 2.5-inch drives, optical drives, memory card readers. As you can see, this case doesn't even have the ability to add that anymore because everybody's downloading everything. And now the internet is your library instead of having to maintain your own personal library. That's something else that comes with age. Those of us that are used to buying a series, you know, Star Trek on VHS, then you bought the whole series of Star Trek on DVD, or maybe then again on Blu-ray. Well, now it's just, you know, Netflix or Paramount Plus or whatever, and you let them host it, and it'll save you a ton of money. Because if you try and watch those Blu-ray, if you try and watch those DVDs or those VHS tapes today, they do not look good on a big screen TV. You'd have to go Blu-ray to get to high definition. So let me get another cold Gatorade. This one's kind of warm, and I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. All right, I know this one looks like it's the same one, but it's a different one. This one's cold. Gulls Camp says, I've never had a liquid cooler fail. And I haven't died either, but I will one day. Liquid coolers on average will fail after about 4 years. And you just need to look at the history of videos on this channel, and it proves that. It's just not deniable. Your individual experience, of course, is yours and yours alone, but does not establish the average of what most people will experience. So some people will experience a cooler failure in 2 years, and others maybe 6 or 7 years, with the average being about 3 to 4 years, sometimes 5. So I usually say 4, right down the middle, between 3 and 5. But that doesn't mean every cooler. You know, we live in a world now where people have a comprehension problem. I see this all the time, where you say something and people don't there's something wrong with the comprehension of the world today, where everything is literal and everything is them. It's all about them. I don't know anything about you, and I don't know how long you've had a cooler, and I don't know what the cooler is, but they all will fail. In fact, everything on this planet is going to fail. Nothing lasts forever. Somebody might say they've never been in a car accident until they get into a car accident. So the statistics are what I'm working off of in averages, because you don't have any scale. You have one computer. This is a typical enthusiast, hobbyist mentality where only their experience matters. So I'm not saying you're guaranteed to experience the problem, because you might sell the computer or replace the cooler for other reasons before it fails. What I'm saying is, at scale, if you have 1,000 liquid coolers installed, you would not say you've never had one fail. In fact, if you had 10 liquid coolers installed over a period of 4 years, you'd likely have about 3 or 4 of those have failed, generally speaking, with a few exceptions, and that's at a minimum. It would be that or more, based on statistics and averages. So far be it for me to tell you what your experience is, but your experience doesn't dictate what others should expect. That's all I'm saying. Let's see what else we have in the chat room here. Maybe the best way to respond to a sort of a bold comment like that, that's so myopic, would be to ask if anybody in the chat room has ever had a liquid cooler fail, and if so, how long did it last? Now, I don't know who's watching the channel. We have people watching from all over the world. This is live and unscripted, and I don't know who most of you are, so I don't know what you're going to say. But I can tell you with the confidence of somebody who's been in the industry as long as I have and the experience that I have, I would fully expect most of you who have had liquid coolers for more than 3 years have had a liquid cooler failure. If you haven't had a liquid cooler failure in ownership of over 3 years, I would ask if you ever had a liquid cooler. There'll always be a few exceptions to the rule, though. Made Geek Base Boost says 2 failures over about 2 to 3 years. Cord Oliver says yes, 1.5 years. Ricardo says never had an issue. So if you've never had an issue, give us a time frame of, for how long, how many years. Dead Skellington says, should I wait to buy a CPU cooler or use the default cooler that comes with a CPU, an AMD CPU, and then replace it with a cooler later for overclocking? That's your choice. That's absolutely your choice. F Rain says, I've had a liquid cooler since 2015. It has never failed, and it's a Corsair 100i. Well, that's impressive. Serious Sam said, I had one fail after 3 years. William Dawson said, I had one fail after 4 years, where the pump died. Crazy66 says he had one fail at 5 years. Lawn Dog says, some of my customers who are gamers who run their PC all day long. Ricardo Nabel says 3 years. Stealth Mode said they had a 120 millimeter all-in-one that failed after 6 years. You see how I'm getting, see how you take these numbers in average amount, you're going to get about 4 years average. And I have no control over what people are saying. Bobik M says 8 years, it's still running very strong, very good. Mark Dalton says he's got an H115i Pro, which is now at 4 years and still going strong. Nick Poverman said he had a customer's liquid cooler fail after 3 years. Paul Garrett said he's had 2 NZXT Kraken all-in-one liquid coolers fail at 3 years. So, I mean, you can see I'm not biased. I'm not, I'm not in the air cooler business. I'm not trying to sway you away from buying an all-in-one liquid cooler, but rather I'm trying to get your expectations set accordingly so you're prepared and understand that statistically, and I can only talk statistically, you should expect to replace it after about 4 years, three to 5 years, so 4 years on average. But you can look in the chat room and read through the comments. I don't know most of these people. Certainly haven't met most of them. And we don't have agreements where they, whatever I say with you agree. There's nothing in it for me. If people say, I don't know what you're talking about, Kerry. I've had a liquid cooler for 10 years. Anybody in the chat room ever had a liquid cooler for 10 years or more? That's still working? I would think there's going to be nobody. But there could be an exception out there. But that's the point I'm trying to make. That's all. It's not about you. It's just an average. All right, so with the power supply installed, we can now get the motherboard put in. Let me move this cage out of the way, and let me move these zip ties out of the way, and that little pile right there should be good. And let's put this over here. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky because the pump is attached to the board, and so this is a two-handed operation here. We'll bring that up. We already have the CPU, RAM, storage, everything's good to go, along with the Be Quiet Pure Loop 280 millimeter radiator, And this is brand new. Be Quiet moves their pump right up here, which I think is ugly. It would be nice if the pump were actually connected to the radiator, but it might interfere the thickness with the location of the fan. I understand moving the pump away from the block means they don't have to pay the royalties to Asetek, but I think you should just pay the royalties to Asetek and charge $2 more for the cooler. I don't like the way this looks. The reason we're often choosing a liquid cooler is for the looks. As I mentioned, a big Noctua cooler sitting on top of that would cover the RAM. I still have that D15 sitting back here without the fans on it, and if I come back here and grab it and just kind of set it in front, you'll get an idea, you know, more of a visual idea of what I'm describing. So a cooler like this one, for example, this was a Noctua D15. It's going to have a fan here and then a fan sandwiched between the two radiators. And so this cooler would go on like this. And you see how there's a cutout in the cooler right here? Do you notice that? That's because that's going to overlap your RAM. So these first two RAM modules, you won't see them. So this RGB is a waste of money. And then some of the higher end boards with the higher end CPUs have RAM sockets also on the other side. And those coolers are hard to cool. They're high-end coolers. Those CPUs are hard to cool. They're high-end CPUs. So they have the same cutout on the other side for the same reason, covering up the first two RAM modules nearest to the CPU on each side. It's not a terrible thing to look at. I mean, you're just going to be staring at this if you look through the glass window. There's no RGB on it. It's black, and it can sort of get absorbed, you know, with other black items in the case. So it doesn't really stand out more than as a shadow. But the Be Quiet cooler, or any liquid cooler, and certainly with RGB, adds rather than takes away from any added RGB, giving us a reason more so to have that glass panel. So it's all about aesthetic. The other issue I have with these is in shipping. If I ship a computer with one of these giant air coolers, they tend to bend and become, they tend to go sideways. There's also some concern when you're putting this in that it's going to hang vertically. On an AMD, it would hang like this, and it's putting a lot of weight onto that socket and bending a little bit, putting some pressure onto the motherboard. And how does that fare out over time? So far, I haven't seen any issues in reality over that theory, but it is a little disconcerting, especially anytime you have to move the computer when shipping the computer, which I don't have to worry about with a liquid cooler. So there's pros and cons, no matter which way you look at it. And also an air cooler like this is about half or less the price of a liquid cooler. So just putting that back. All right, so I have to figure out how I'm going to get this board in. There's our instruction manual for the case. And we have a removable top here. This filter is something you would want to use if you don't have any liquid cooler up here. If you do have a liquid cooler up here, and you're mounting the fans to the bottom so that they're taking air from inside of the case and pushing the air, or you're going to be pulling the air from inside and then pushing it out the top. We don't filter air that's exhaust air. We filter input air, right? We want to prevent dust and debris from getting in the case. But any dust and debris that want to blow out, I would encourage that. So this has a magnetic strip along each side, and it will stick to the case. And the reason it's removable is to accommodate a combination of functionality and looks. So with this on top, it looks better looking down on it if it's going to be sitting on a floor. But if you have a liquid cooler, you want that removed. Unless you're bringing air from outside, if you've mounted your fans the other way, which I'm not even sure that would be possible, you would be bringing air from outside this way, and then you would keep this on, assuming your fans were up here and then the radiator were below them. But again, I'm not sure there's any way to do that. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but it's not traditional, and it's not the way any liquid cooler instructions are going to advise you to how to install. Usually, if we're going to bring air in that way, we sandwich the fans between the radiator and the case when we're doing the front of the case. We'll universally bring air in on the front. We never exhaust air out the front. And so we would put the fans on the outside of the case, the radiator on the inside of the case, and then when we screw them together, they sandwich the case in between. And then we have the filters on the front. They're always going to be there. Those never come off because that's universally an input for air, or an inlet for air. Just looking through the comments here before I continue, because I'm not looking forward to this part of the build. Catherine says you could put white foil to cover the glass. Yeah, well, I mean, you could take a can of spray paint and spray paint the glass if you didn't want to see through it. That's true. But then you spent more for your case because the glass adds a significant amount of cost. It's tempered glass. It's not cheap glass. Lawn Dog says, I'm wondering if CPUs that run off maybe 65 or 95 watts of power total, maximum, if they had a liquid cooler on them and the liquid cooler were to fail, he says he's pretty sure a PC would run just fine because of the water block. Well, but a liquid cooler wouldn't be necessary. You can take a Core i3, as I've demonstrated in a previous video, with no cooler at all. And I can run Prime 95 on it all day and it never overheats. Or it might get into a situation where it throttles, but it never shuts down, it never blue screens. So yes, a lower wattage processor is not going to run as hot, therefore it doesn't need that level of cooler. I've even seen Core i5s, I saw one where the CPU fan was connected incorrectly and wasn't turning. The end user had no idea. The end user was using this at a dentist office 5 or 6 days a week, 8 hours a day for over a year. It was like that. And the reason I was called to service it was their solid state drive was 120 gig and they ran out of space. They were getting memory errors and they needed a bigger storage drive. This was one of the first solid state drives I had installed back in 2014. And I went out there with Acronis and cloned the 120 to the 240 and noticed that the CPU fan wasn't turning and that the connector was on incorrectly. It's on the wrong set of pins. And I asked the client, have you had any problems with the computer? No, it's been a very reliable, good computer. So, well, it should be even better now because I hooked the CPU fan up. But I was only there to change out the drive. Who knew? So the higher end CPUs is where the issue is. And putting a liquid cooler on a low end CPU would be done purely for looks. It won't be done for any sort of cooling performance benefit on a low end CPU. And if you've got that kind of money to spend on the looks, I don't know why you wouldn't have just bought a better processor. And you know, if you're emphasizing the looks over the performance, you know, that's your choice. But I can't make sense of that. But people going to do what people going to do. And a lot of what people do don't make sense. A lot of what companies and corporations do with regards to their IT department and how they manage their computers and their policies and their processes regarding data backups and security always makes sense. Always. For big, large corporations. Bruce wants to know if I think vertically mounted cases, you're talking about the radiators, vertically mounted radiators, are superior to horizontally mounted. No, it's just a personal insight. Do you think the color red is a better color than the color blue? It's your choice. It doesn't make any difference in the cooling or the performance of the cooling. So it's just a personal choice. They're preferences, not facts. Justin Habu says, greetings, Carrie and chat, watching from a very windy South Berwick, Maine. I've never been to Maine. I'd love to go to Maine. All right, so there's the fun part. I got to figure out how I'm going to get this motherboard installed here. So start the circus music. Other techs are going to come out, like of a little Volkswagen Beetle. It'll be like 15 techs come out here. Little Geek Squad, Volkswagen Beetle. All right, the first thing is I want to lay the case flat and let gravity help me. That'll be the first time gravity's ever helped me. And I'm going to grab the board. You see how I'm grabbing the board and where I'm putting my fingers? I'm not touching anything metal. I don't have to wear an anti-static strap because I'm not touching anything electronic. If there's a static discharge, it goes into the heat sink or on the plastic or anywhere in the radiator. There's nothing to hurt there. If you're going to grab the board by the parts, I hope you're electronically grounded. Set the board down. And I want to kind of eyeball this before I get too far. The last thing I want to do is get it 3/4 of the way put together and have to take it all apart. I already do that far too often. I'd like to reduce the number of times I do that. I'd like to do it once and do it right the first time so I can move on to the next thing. And I got a lot of next things in the wings, waiting patiently for their turn. Now, as though I didn't have enough obstacles in my way, I also have the fan cable here that's now been pinched by the motherboard, but not severely, but enough so that it's preventing me from moving the board any further without using force. And if I do that, I will likely damage this cable and then have to replace that fan. So I've got the radiator kind of delicately balanced on top of the case, and I'm going to be delicate in moving this board because it's attached to the board, and if I move it too much, it'll fall. Sometimes it's easier to take these rear case fans out when you're dealing with a motherboard that has an I/O shroud around the I/O cover. That's also just for looks, which wouldn't benefit you if you didn't have a glass panel to see it. So you wouldn't have to spend as much money on a motherboard because boards that have the I/O shrouds cost more money. So I just want to align the board, first of all, within the case. It's not seating anywhere. This case, these Corsair cases should have that center post for the board to rest on, and I'm not seeing it. There it is. Okay, so it's on the center post now. And now what I want to know is if I turn the radiator like this, and if I were to install that radiator up here, can I still see or access the top of the board? And the answer is a resounding no. No, you cannot. In fact, the radiator is hitting the RAM modules. So that's not good. But could we make it fit if we wanted to layer everything? And that's what I'm trying to determine right now. But I am absolutely hitting the RAM modules, right at the edge of the RAM module. And these cables are getting in my way. But that's pretty much where the board's going to go. And yeah, so the radiator's right up against, well, the fans on the radiator are right up against the edge of the RAM, and the other side of the radiator is hitting that I/O shroud. So the radiator's sitting like this inside of the case. We could remove the I/O shroud and permanently take it off, but it's still going to cover the entire top of the motherboard. Let me grab the portable camera. Let me show you so you have a better understanding. I cannot lift this case up without everything falling out because it's all being held in with gravity. Let's take a look and see if I can use the wireless camera to showcase this particular dilemma. I was hopeful that this case would be large enough, but it is not. Could I make it work? I could. I absolutely could make it work, but I would rather choose a different case where I didn't have to work so hard. Because likely I will have to work on it again at some point in the future, and maybe again and again after that, depending on repairs or upgrades that would be necessary. And at some point, if 4 years goes by, it would be expected the liquid cooler would die if we follow the averages, and we're right back to doing all this work again. So let's see if I can get this camera activated on OBS. See, I've got the wireless camera here. Where's my OBS? Right here. And we'll go to, I think, is this camera 3? I think it's camera 3. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. All right. As we take a peek inside, you see the I/O shield here is right up against the fan. And you see how the cooler goes down like that, because that I/O shield's in the way. Why is the I/O shield there? It's just for looks. It doesn't actually do anything. Then we look at the RAM, and if we get things out of the way, you can see how, when it's a tight fit like this, if it's hard for you to see, imagine how hard it is to work on. And right at the edge of the RAM, right at the edge. It kind of fits, but it is touching, and that's not good, because over time with vibration, that can cause RAM to be dislodged out of the socket, not visibly enough for you to notice it, but enough for the circuit to break, and then causing weird random blue screen errors is usually the symptom on that. So if we were to raise this cooler up, and we use the holes, we'd have to use the holes right up here, these top slots for this radiator. Our major point of obstruction is the I/O shield. See how the I/O shield, it kind of raises up right here. It goes higher. It even goes higher. It goes up 3 times. Here, and then it goes up here, and then it goes up again. And then it hits the radiator. And then the CPU fan connector is back under here. The CPU power connector is back under there. And if this radiator were to be any lower, it would then hit the CPU the CPU power cable, that 8-pin power cable, which is pretty tall with the cables coming out and bending out to the back. It's going to hit that for sure. So that is not a good choice, but we have the front of the case that we could put this cooler on, and that would likely fit better. So I think that's the next thing to try, is let's take away the radiator from the top and try mounting it to the front instead. So let me put this back. Hold on a second. Let me put this back. Okay. I'll give this to you for now. Thank you. So then the question is, if we mount the radiator to the front of the case, this is not the airflow case. This is not the case that has the holes in the front. That's a solid front. So how's the radiator going to breathe? Well, it'll breathe okay. There's slots for the air to come in from the sides. Sometimes they're at the top and bottom. This is sealed on the top and bottom. However, air will come in off the sides. It's not as good as, say, the airflow that would be on the airflow case for something in the front, like a radiator. But it'll work. It'll be okay. The dilemma I'm having, my hesitation is if I even want to do this. A lot of these computer cases are fine with standard builds, but the minute we're adding the liquid cooler or we're going with RGB, we've got cable management consideration to think about. We've got ease of access to get in and out for any repairs or upgrades, which this case doesn't help us with if we mount the radiator at the top. Regardless of who makes the radiator, none of them are going to fit well at the top, no matter which motherboard you use. It's going to be overlapping the top of the board on every style of motherboard, no matter what. In this case, we also have obstructions based on the motherboard because it has the I/O shield, the I/O cover or shroud. We can remove the front fan and put the radiator in vertically, and that will likely solve the problem, but it won't work optimally because of the restriction in the airflow. It'll likely work good enough. The fans on the radiator may have to turn faster on average in order to move enough air through than they would if there was a clearer pathway for the air. But other than that, it should be fine. So where I am hesitating is whether or not to choose a different case. I sort of have it fixated in my mind that this radiator is going to be mounted at the top. And yet the last two cases, well, the last three cases that we've worked on, we can make it work, but it's not easy. I don't mind mounting the radiator to the front as long as we have adequate airflow coming out of the front. The airflow version of the same case would fix that, and it may just be a front panel we have to change to make that difference. We could go to Corsair maybe and get the airflow front panel. It'll work regardless. Like I say, I just think that the noise level will be a little higher because the fans will have to theoretically turn a little bit more. And I almost feel like maybe I've got the wrong case and I should be focused on looking at a more appropriate case for this build. You know, this is a $500 CPU in here. So why somebody would spend that kind of money on the CPU and then try and buy the cheapest case possible or the cheapest of anything possible with regards to the computer doesn't make any sense to me. We're using it because we have it, and I don't know that that's a good enough reason for the amount of labor that's going to be involved in it. And so I might just stop here and set the board and power supply aside for another day when I have another case to try. I did not do any research about the fitment on this. I'm too busy. I just thought, let's try it and see. I wouldn't recommend you do that, especially if you're a home user. I have other cases. I probably have 20 other cases here, and I would just have to go through each case and take a look at it and see if any of those would be adequate for this. But this is a part of what you're signing up for if this is the kind of thing you're looking for, which is a high-end CPU that needs liquid cooling with a glass paneled case to show it all off. It's time-consuming and expensive for all the wrong reasons, in my opinion. What do you guys think? What would you do if you were me? Not that I'm going to do it, but I'm curious. James Brock says not being able to top mount the radiator happens more often than not, unfortunately, and it's very common. Sarge Tech says, is this a lost cause? Well, this particular hardware configuration is more difficult than I prefer. And I know if I get a better case, I can do the job much faster with less effort. And I know that servicing the computer will also be much faster with less effort. So just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. John Rogers said he would go with a bigger case. Peter Brooks said use an air cooler. Well, as I mentioned with the air cooler, those reasons are why we're not going with the air cooler. Austin says we would love more cooking with Carrie episodes from years ago. I'd love to do more of them. I just have to get through. I mean, you have no idea how many people are waiting on me for computer help. And, you know, for me to ignore them so I can make a couple cooking videos isn't really sending a very good message to them that they're not important to me. And the cooking videos aren't paying me any money. So the people with money in their hand saying, I need you to fix this computer problem, they're in line waiting. And I'm just trying to get through as many as I can, as quickly as I can. And that's why I'm hesitant to even begin a project that I know is going to take more time. And even when it's done, it's going to continually take more time to service it. It's just a never-ending cycle. So I'd rather build it correctly, by my definition of that term, because it's just easier to build, easier to maintain. Claudiu says Fantex P500A is a good case for a top mount 280 millimeter all-in-one. It's a good tip. Appreciate that. Can I remove the VRM heatsink? The voltage regulator modules get hot. Removing the heatsink off of them would be unwise. You wouldn't need it if we weren't using such a high-end CPU. So you've got to pick one or the other, right? If you want that high-performance CPU, you're going to have to keep it cool, and that includes keeping those voltage regulator modules cool because it's going to draw more power than a lesser CPU would. So you can't have both. You have to pick one or the other. Can I mount the radiator on the outside of the case? No. The hoses from the radiator, they're pretty large, and they have to have an opening that the radiator case doesn't have. Furthermore, that would be sort of, what's a polite way to say, if you wanted to promote to people you had no idea what you were doing, then go ahead and cut holes in the case with some kind of a Dremel tool or Sawzall so you can get the hoses through, and then put your radiator on the outside. You could do it, but you'd just be like advertising to the world that you have no clue how computers work. John Nunley says, unless it's a Corsair 4000D with the mesh front, again, that's called the airflow, the Corsair 4000D airflow. He says, I would mount the cooler at the front of the case, but since it's a solid front, I wouldn't install it there either. He says, good choice on your part, Carrie. Choice being, pick a different case, don't even try. So the suggestions from James Brock, I have to assume, are meant to be funny and that he's not serious. Because he's saying, and I'm going to share the joke with all of you, and the joke is, put the radiator in the front and put the fans on the top. So no fans on the radiator. Do you think that the vacuum of air being pulled in naturally through the case fans at the top is going to be enough air? You should try driving your car in reverse for about 75 miles. Because what's going to happen is the radiator's at the front of your car, and while you're pumping liquid through that radiator, you're not moving any air through it because you're driving in reverse. And after you drive in reverse for a certain amount of miles, your car's going to overheat. So I have to assume James Brock is trying to be funny. And I want you all to know that is absolutely silliness. It wouldn't function very well if we didn't put fans directly onto the radiator. So let's see what other selections and options people are suggesting in the chat room to solve this little dilemma. And it's not to downplay the case at all, right? I mean, you have to understand what you're buying. And this was more of a curiosity because it's significantly bigger than the 500DX, but not really much any flexible. It's not any more flexible than that 500DX. Both cases are fine with air coolers, but that's not what we need. Wilhelm Gordon contributes $19.99. Hey, Wilhelm, thank you for that. Jacob said, I have a suggestion for a case. How about the Lian Li LandCool 205 mesh? That case has a removable tray to mount the radiator. Well, from what you're describing, that would be preferred, but I don't know what that case looks like. I have to research that. Can I remove the part that's blocking the radiator? Yes, but the radiator, and again, I don't know what the comprehension problem is. It's like people only hear part of what I say, and it's really frustrating to me. We could get the radiator installed if we remove this decorative cover. But the reason the decorative cover is there is for the looks. And the part that you seem to be forgetting is the radiator is covering the top of the board. So it's still going to hit that 8-pin CPU power cable, and it's still going to block access to the CPU fan header and any other plugs at the top of the motherboard. So I'm not quite sure how many times I have to repeat that for people to hear it, but we don't just have a radiator mounting obstruction, then the radiator becomes the obstruction once we get the radiator installed to the rest of the connections at the top of the motherboard. So that's, again, it's not just one thing, it's three things, right? It's the decorative cover, which is no longer decorative if we remove it. Given that there's a glass panel, we want to make things as decorative as possible. Otherwise, what's the point of having the glass panel? And if we're going to service the computer, we need to have access easily to have access to the CPU power cable, and if we have to replace a power supply, to the CPU fan header. And all of that will be blocked by the radiator. The radiator would have to come out to access any of that. And potentially, even the CPU power cable alone may not allow the radiator to sit fully down where it needs to on this side, because that's where that cable is, and that cable is going to stand up about that tall. And if you look at the CPU power connector on any motherboard, you've got the plug and you've got the wires coming out of the plug, and you're going to have about 8 wires. I'm not sure what gauge they are, but they need to bend, so they kind of come up and back over. So all in all, you've got a good 2 inches that you need. And so when we put that radiator in, we're going to have to push down on those high voltage cable. Well, they're only 12 volts, but they're critical to the CPU. And we need to basically squish those down for that radiator to fit correctly. It's not going to be something we can reach in and unplug. The radiator will have to come out to do any kind of work like that. So yeah, I wouldn't remove a decorative cover where we've got a glass panel. I wouldn't have ordered a board with a decorative cover. You understand? Like, that's, unless it was on sale, I wouldn't pay more for a board to take the thing I'm paying more for and throw it in the trash. You know, if we're going for aesthetics, then let's go for aesthetics. And if we're going for performance, let's go for performance. Both of those are expensive. But if we want to go for performance and aesthetics, take these 2 expensive things and add them up to equal more expensive, and then take the labor and double it, including cable management. This is what you should expect if you want to build a high performance computer that also looks amazing. And then anytime you have to work on it, like I said, a lot of times that radiator is going to have to come out. And if you're not doing this for a living, you may not care. But if you are doing this for a living, it will significantly impact your ability to earn money, because there's only so much you can charge for it, or you turn the job down. David says, just change the case and no more problems. Maybe. We've changed the case 3 times. This is the 3rd case this configuration has been attempted in. And even it's a different cooler than what originally came with it. And it's just not going to fit. So if you're going to want to add a 240 or 280 millimeter radiator to your build because you have a high-end CPU or you just like the looks of the RGB or whatever, be very careful and do your research on the case that you select. If you have no plans to put a radiator in, you can pretty much make any case work. Pretty much. There are some cases where you have to even watch with air coolers that the air coolers are wider, taller than the case is, and then you can't put the panel back on. But that doesn't happen too often. Is it a 360 millimeter radiator? There's an easy way to tell. Count the number of fans. If there are 240 millimeter fans, then that would be 280 millimeters, 140 plus 140. So what number do you get if we add another 140, right? So, or if there are 120 millimeter fans. So 120 plus 120 is 240. If we add a third 120, we're at 360. So you can easily tell how big a radiator is, first of all, by how many fans it has, and if those are the big fans or the little fans. The 140 are the big fans, the 120 are the smaller fans. And then, because the fans are smaller diagonally, they're measured, when you look at the size of the radiator on a 120 millimeter fan that secures to a radiator, that radiator is skinnier. Tim Too Much says the 5000D Corsair is a lot bigger. Yeah, of course. That's why it's a 5000D and not a 4000D. Just looking through the comments here, see if there's other suggestions I might have missed. Fritz Music says, are we dead on this case, or what are other case options? The only way around is modding. Yeah, well, that's what I'm debating. Like, I just might end this video early because if I can't complete what I've started, then that's it for today's live stream. Any other live stream would require some preparation. As I prepped for this one, it's just not going to work for us, unfortunately. Again, I could make it work, but it just wouldn't be to my standard. It's not something that I would sell to anybody with any confidence, and it doesn't live up to the minimum requirements that I have for computers I sell. Might be good enough for somebody else who's more willing to play it fast and loose. I take my business too seriously because without it, I'd be homeless. And I want to make sure my customers are being sold things I would own myself. And I wouldn't do this to myself. There's no way. I mean, if I had a full-time job doing something else, and this was something I did on the side for myself for fun, then I could see that. But it's no way to run a business. I mean, we saw what Lyte Computers did and what they allowed to be acceptable that should have never gone out the door. And if it was my company, heads would have rolled for even attempting it. There is a certain minimum standard that a consumer should be able to expect from a professional. And if that professional is acting like somebody who just works in their garage without any accountability, it's offensive to professionals, to real professionals. And I want to make sure my customers are always happy with their purchases and always want to refer me to their friends and will come back to me because they want to, not because they have to, for anything else that they might need regarding their computer. And I don't want to have to say, well, this is going to take a long time because the way it's built is more labor intensive. They didn't know that when they ordered it. It's not like anybody's going to say, oh, by the way, if you order this computer, it's going to be way harder to work on. Nobody's going to tell you that. And I won't sell it that way. So here we are. I think we're sort of dead now for the rest of the stream until I have another case solution. Like I said, we could make the radiator fit to the front if we want to replace the front panel. However, this is a great case for a different design motherboard. Perhaps a motherboard with an i7 or an i5 with no liquid cooler would be ideal for this case. I don't think any liquid cooler is going to fit in the 4000D very well. It'll always overlap the top of the board. And the same with the 500DX. They're just too cheap of a case. Well, it's possible to make it fit. It's not the way it should fit, in my opinion. Kcordia's technology is telling me how I can make the radiator fit. I've already explained to Kcordia's technology, who again isn't listening, and I will say it now a fourth time, that the radiator, when it fits, will be blocking the access to the CPU fan header and the CPU power connector, making working on this computer in the future requiring the removal of the radiator to get to those parts. I thought maybe if I said it slower and drawn out, I'd have your attention long enough that you'd hear what I just said, because apparently I talk too fast. Bizarre. It's a really weird world we live in. I never said the radiator wouldn't fit. I said there were consequences. And we have an obstruction with a decorative cover over the I/O ports on the motherboard that I don't want to remove. So I don't know why I have to keep saying it over and over and over. It's weird. It's very weird. There's lyrics to a song by a group called Missing Persons in the 1980s called What Are Words For When No One Listens Anymore? I think I'll dye my hair blue. I could totally relate to the lyrics. Yates Networks with $10 says, thank you for streaming today. Thank you, Yates. That's very generous of you. I appreciate you. Yeah, unfortunately, I was really hopeful that we'd have this built today, but you could see how far hope got me. You can have all the wishful positive thinking in the world, it doesn't shift to reality. But it is what it is, and I would much prefer a better, more appropriate case, not better, but just more appropriate for this particular hardware that we're using. That would make installation and maintenance painless, just like any other computer. I wouldn't expect to have to work harder simply because a machine has a liquid cooler. There's no legitimate reason for that. If you get the right design case designed for that, it shouldn't be any more difficult or time consuming to work on it apart from the additional cable management. But in this case, you know, was close. It's so close to having everything we needed, just not quite tall enough, which is what I suspected before I started, but at least I didn't mount everything, so I can just take it all right back out again. So I'm glad to demonstrate in real life what you're not typically going to see on these enthusiast and hobbyist channels that are going to do polished, edited videos that are often scripted and nothing more than long commercials paid for by the companies of the parts they're showcasing. I think if your ad blocker really blocked ads, it wouldn't let you watch those videos because they're nothing more than advertisements from paying companies. That's why you'll see certain manufacturers on certain large tech channels. You'll see certain manufacturers over and over and over again. It's not that that particular tech channel prefers that manufacturer. It's they have a financial arrangement with the manufacturer, and they likely have to get the manufacturer's permission before they publish any videos. They cannot do it live. They would violate their contract. Not that that's a terrible business model, but just understand the purpose behind why some people make videos. I don't make videos to earn money. I do computer work to earn money. And anything I make off the videos is extra. And well, I would love to make a full-time living making videos. YouTube, the algorithm is always changing. And 2 years ago, I made twice as much money on a channel that was half the size. This channel was half its size 2 years ago, and I made twice as much money from this channel. I haven't done anything wrong. Just YouTube advertising rates are what they are, and I don't have any control over it. If I wanted to do finance videos, I could make more per video recommending stocks and cryptocurrencies and foreign exchange purchases than I make on educational computer tech videos. So, you know, it's up to the content creator to go establish sponsors, and in doing so, make commercials for companies. But when I do my sponsorships, the minute a company wants me to make a commercial for them, the deal's off. Like, if I truly believe in the product and it's something that I do use myself and I do recommend to my customers, then I want them as a sponsor, right? It's just a natural fit. But a company recently sent me a product that they wanted me to review, and we worked those arrangements out, and they sent the product, and the product arrived late. It was several days late. And they said, you know, you need to show us the video before you air it. And I'm like, it's live. How am I supposed to do that? And I said, oh, we can't allow that. I said, I thought you were wanting a review, but what you want is a commercial. Now, commercials, those run about $60,000 to $80,000 to make a commercial. If you want to make a commercial, I'm sure I could put a crew together and we can rent a studio and we can make you a commercial. But that's not a review or even an overview. I don't even mind doing an overview where I don't have an opinion of the product. I just say, well, here's what it is, and here's what it costs, and here's what it can do. I don't mind that at all. But to make a commercial, you better open up your wallet because commercials are expensive. And that's how these big tech channels can air these commercials, because they have a staff of cinematographers and audio engineers and editors, and they all need to get paid. And so they end up making, you know, commercials for large brands. And again, you'll know that because you'll keep seeing the same brands over and over and over again. You'll see motherboards from a certain company or monitors from a specific company, and you won't see any competitive product because it would violate that arrangement they have with the content creator. And I'm not saying it's bad, but it's a little bit hidden if you're not aware of what's going on. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, you're just watching a large commercial that your ad blocker should be blocking if it were truly an ad blocker. In any event, that's where I'm at and why. And it may be why today's broadcast then will be a bit shorter than we normally do. But hopefully, when I try and put this into a machine, the fourth time is the charm. Although it'll be my third time. The machine was actually, you know, when this was built, was not good. So I'm counting that as 1. The Be Quiet 500DX is 2. The Corsair 4000D is 3. And whether I look at Fantex or I look at Lee or I look at some other solution, yeah, I could maybe order the front, but I really don't want to. I kind of feel like you bought something that wasn't designed to do what you need it to do, and now you're trying to force it. I'm not a fan of that. I would rather use this case for pretty much any other build, and it's going to be just fine. And true with the 500DX as well. And hopefully be able to finish up the other computer that I didn't have the modular power cable for to hook up the cooler, right? We did all that work and couldn't complete the job or even test it without that power connector. So that power connector did come in, and I will revisit that next week, maybe on Monday. And that should be, if everything works, should be a short video. But I've got lots and lots of other content waiting in the wings, other products to review. And that company that sent me the product that wants a commercial, the product's being sent back. I never even opened it out of the box. All I'm going to do is change the label on the box and send it right back to them and say thanks, but no thanks. I'm my own worst enemy for my success, right? I mean, they'll pay me to do it, but they're not paying me enough. They're not paying me enough to sell out. I'm not making a commercial. I'm not submitting a video for approval. I'm not doing it. Unless the money's about 10 times more than they're offering, minimum, and preferably 20 times more. Then it might be worth it for me. Madi contributes $5. Thank you, Madi. And I would also remind you that we always have that 30% off of RoboForm. Speaking of sponsorships that I don't make commercials for. I use RoboForm every day. I love it. I recommend it. Been using it for about 15, 16, 17 years. We've got the deal with Acronis that's 40% off until May 15th of 2022. And then we have those bargain priced, legit Windows and Office product keys from the great folks at CDK Deals. And all the information is in the video notes below the video with all of the links to all of those products if you want to save some money. And everything is guaranteed, so you have no risk at all with any of these products. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the contributions and support. And Peter Laycock and others. Michael Dane contributes $5 and says, greetings, Professor Kerry Holtzman, and Madi Yoel and Yates Networks. Stephen Gerzak contributed $1.99. Thank you, Stephen. Wilhelm Gordon, thank you for your contribution. And there might be some that happened before that, but I didn't have the viewer activities selected, so I don't have it recorded, unfortunately. But hopefully I got everybody shouted out at the time. I appreciate you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. Today's not terrible. I mean, I didn't get done what I wanted to, but I also didn't, bust up my knuckles trying to make something work and force something to work. That could have led to a bad day. This one I'm going to call early just because I can already see where it's going and I don't want to go there with it. But I'll do some research over the weekend and see if I can't find a better case. And also just double check my inventory. I might have something on hand that'll work. Ironically, Marvin, the person who owned this motherboard, gave me a Thermaltake case, very old case, brand new in a box, never been taken out. I need to take a closer look at that case because that might be exactly what we need. And Marvin might have just handed me the solution, but I need to double check. So thanks again for watching and joining me on this little journey of exploration and discovery on computer parts and compatibility. I will see you all again very, very soon. Until then, bye for now.